When the Yom Kippur War broke out, the nations of Israel and Egypt were led by two important leaders, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. The two leaders were heavily impacted by their life experiences, helping draw their nations into war and influencing how the war was fought. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir was born in Tsarist Russia. As a child, she was in constant fear of the pogroms aimed at Jews, fearing for the safety of her family if one materialized. Though she never was a victim of one, her time in the Russian Empire left her with the lifelong belief that Jews would always be the world's underdogs. This belief did not change even after Israel's decisive victory in the Six-Day War. As a child, Meir and her family moved to the United States, living there for several years. Her time in America left her with a deep recognition of the importance of America's support for Zionism. Decades later, during Israel's War of Independence, Meir would raise enormous sums of money from America to help the Israeli war effort. These experiences would affect her as Prime Minister. During the Yom Kippur War, she would work hard to make sure America was on Israel's side. Meir's commitment to an American alliance influenced her actions just hours before the Yom Kippur War broke out. She received word that an attack would occur very soon, and she needed to decide whether to conduct a preemptive strike against the Arab militaries. Meir decided not to attack first. She did not want to risk alienating the United States, and she informed the American ambassador that she had chosen not to strike. Her decision may have cost Israeli lives, but did keep America on Israel's side. President Nixon supplied Israel with essential military hardware to replace its losses. Like Meir, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was heavily influenced by his upbringing. He grew up in an Egyptian village. Sadat was installed with village values, believing in the importance of the village's honor and territorial integrity. As President of Egypt, Sadat would apply these values to all the country when he decided to restore the honor and territory that had been lost in the Six-Day War to Israel. Early in his life, Sadat was involved in resistance to British rule in Egypt. Sadat would be part of a coup against Egypt's corrupt British-backed monarchy, which ended the British domination of Egypt. Decades later as president, Sadat would make sure he was never the puppet of a foreign country. When he felt that the Soviet Union was dictating Egypt's foreign policy, Sadat expelled his Soviet military advisors. Sadat's decision to go to war was heavily influenced by his values. Unlike most Arab leaders, such as his ally Syrian President Assad, Sadat was willing to have peace with Israel. But one of his major preconditions for peace came out of his beliefs about territorial integrity. He saw Israel's occupation of the Sinai as an encroachment on the honor of both himself and all of Egypt. He demanded that the sum of the Sinai needed to be returned, which would regain some of Egypt's lost honor before Egypt would talk to Israel. But Meir's own values complicated things. Meir, likely influenced by her lifelong belief that the Jews would always be the underdogs, was willing to withdraw only to mutually defined boundaries. She considered the unilateral withdrawal to be very dangerous to Israel. Any hopes of possible Israeli negotiations with Sadat ended in 1971, when Israel rejected Sadat's proposal that Israel redeploy its forces from the Suez Canal. This helped convince Sadat, 2 years before the war broke out, that the only way to restore Egypt's territory and honor was war. Any attempts at conflict management ended early in the pre-negotiation phase, when the two sides decided not to negotiate. Sadat and Meir's conditions were both influenced by the outlook they had developed early in life, and the fact that those conditions could not be reconciled made peace very difficult to achieve. When the war broke out, the leadership of Meir and Sadat was impacted by their military experiences, or lack thereof. Meir lacked any military experience or knowledge. She admitted knowing little about military matters and deferred to her defense minister, the legendary war hero Moshe Dayan. Meir would regret her reliance on military advisors. She was convinced shortly before the war broke out that the Egyptian-Syrian attack was imminent, but the military was not, seeing the Arabs as too weak to attack. As a result, Meir did not mobilize troops. She was never able to forgive herself for not mobilizing. However, despite her inexperience, Meir did make military decisions when the high-ranking officers disagreed. She sided with David Elazar, the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff, when she chose to mobilize troops early in the war despite the economic cost and Dayan's disagreement. She was also able to keep Dayan from appearing on television with a very pessimistic message about the war effort. Despite her lack of military experience, Meir did make these good decisions. Sadat, by contrast, had served in the military before becoming president. He showed he was much more involved in military decisions than Meir was when he fired incompetent generals his predecessor had appointed, choosing much more talented men instead. However, Sadat's military history did not prevent him from making a major military mistake. He forced his army chief of staff into a battle that the chief of staff did not consider winnable. The result was a major disaster for Egypt and a turning point in the Yom Kippur War. Despite having vastly different military backgrounds, Meir and Sadat still managed to make good decisions and poor ones. The Yom Kippur War ended partially due to Meir's connection to America. Despite early Arab successes, the Israelis had encircled an Egyptian army and were nearing Cairo. Sadat contacted Richard Nixon, asking him to support a ceasefire. U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger saw this as a chance to turn Egypt from a Soviet ally into an American one and told Meir to accept the ceasefire. Meir did not want to. Israel was close to achieving a complete victory over Egypt. But America's soft negotiation won Meir over. She felt that she owed the United States too much to refuse the ceasefire. As a result, the war ended. The Yom Kippur War ended much like how it began, heavily affected by the decisions of Meir and Sadat. These decisions came out of their life experiences. While individual leadership is not enough to fully explain the Yom Kippur War, it did play a major part in it.